jump in. We have 2 hours of hopefully very thorough discussion, but like always, want to hear from you in the chat, raise your hand, take care of yourself. Feel free to chat us privately if there are any questions, if you need any help or support with anything. Just want to know that we're here to listen to you all. So long road trip from Dallas back to Oregon. Ooh, that sounds like a long road trip. That sounds like fun. Road trips can be fun, Molly. That. Hopefully it was good. When I'm in the car, I will say I just can't stop eating. Like I'll just pull out the snacks within like 30 minutes and I'm just snacking because there's not much else.
All the snacks. All
yeah. Ooh, nachos, delicious. Watch the Beavers win. Lovely Saturday afternoon nap. Katrina, you're speaking my language there.
Totally, I'm there.
Lovely. Thanks all for just, sharing with us a little bit and giving us a glimpse of what brings you joy and what stands out from from the weekend. Hopefully you got a little bit of rest. So, hey, date time, piano recitals. Oh, first one in 2 years. Carrie, that sounds so special. Meat, cheese, and fruit yummies all weekend. Dominic, treats. Oh, I love it. Play dates. Yes. Beautiful. It was my son's last soccer game for like his rec team on Saturday. So that was bittersweet, but we have more soccer coming up. So that was my highlight. I'll pass it on to you, Carrie, when you're ready, if you want to kind of walk us through the agenda.
Yes, great. Thank you, Karina, and thank you for kicking us off. So today's agenda is we're going to touch base and share with you the summary of what we heard back during our last meeting. And Remy sent everyone today's PowerPoint maybe a couple hours ago. So if you want to access stuff so you can refer back to it, you should have that as well. We're going to do 2 advisory conversations today. We're going to get to 2 terms from the legislation, anti-bias education and anti-bias practices. And then we're doing some rule set items related to early care and education providers. So the legislation says what this, which providers this applies to, what the requirements will be in reporting, but there's obviously flexibility within that. So we have draft definitions and requirements for you to review today to give us feedback on the rules language. During our conversation at our last meeting, there was a recommendation that we've continued to have rush conversation and haven't really gotten to sit yet with looking at the totality of the kind of feedback we've received and what that could mean for editing the rules. So many of you offered a 6th meeting and we would like to take you up on it. So Remy has a doodle poll that if you've not gotten to it yet, she'll provide a link so that we could schedule a 6th meeting where we could take a step back and reflect on the feedback across the meetings, have some of the conversations that have come up during these, but that we haven't really gotten enough time to assign, and also talk about next steps in addition to the RAC process when there'll be additional opportunities for engagement. And then, Karina and I like to just ground ourselves in the work that you did with us at the very first meeting around our facilitation and our group agreements. So we just really want to continue to honor and respect the wisdom of this group. We've continued to really appreciate all the feedback you've been giving us in writing, as well as during our full group debriefs, that we really want equity to be at the heart of this effort, and that we do continue to anticipate as we review draft language that we might experience discomfort, unintended consequences. So we really want to prioritize your safety and the ability for you to have conversation with one another, as well as giving feedback to the Early Learning Division about how to bring this legislation and have it reflect accurately in rules. And then here are our group agreements, and I think you've really been embodying them over our meetings. And so I think we just really value the way you're being present in the meeting and respectful of each other's perspective and lived experiences. We're all learning together, and I've seen a lot of curiosity and seeing what the possibilities could be, and really respecting one another's conversations from your small group, but really giving concrete feedback in our full group discussions, as well as what's on the post-it notes. We really do have hope, and we want to reflect on strengths and assets of our children, families, and providers. And we appreciate the shared space that we have with you and the reflection that we've all been having together around what it means to address expulsion and suspension in early childhood. So Katrina is going to take a few minutes to summarize what was the feedback that you gave us on the last meeting.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. So one of the definitions that we talked about last time was anti-racist, but actually before I jump into that, I want to say last week, I just correct myself a little bit. Last week when we were going through the definitions, there were certain ones that I was like, yeah, these ones are, we're actually required to, by the statute to define. And it's true, some of them are indeed required. But I went back and reread some of the specific language in it. And there are some of them that, yes, were required. There's some that were not required, but they're referenced in the legislation, or they're closely related to kind of the other terms, or, you know, the work of the whole program. And so it makes sense. Even if we're not required, it makes sense to define them so that we all know what we're talking about when we use these words. So I just wanted to correct myself from what I said last week. So anti-racist, this is the draft definition that we were working from. So anti-racist means a person whose actions and beliefs actively counteract political, social, educational, and economic policies and practices that place value on the behaviors and values of certain racial groups over other racial groups. Some great feedback on this. So as we introduce this new language, the definition needs to acknowledge white supremacy culture, not individuals. We have responsibility to include clear definitions in this language. Yes, we absolutely do. And there's, as I read through these, there's a lot of comments about making sure we're not referencing a person, but a system and the way of being. So instead of person means a way of being, could also include both a person and a system that is taking action, person/policy/system. Can we update the wording so it is not limited to political, social, educational, economic? Might be possible to identify gaps here. The last sentence is chunky, needs cleaning up. Values mentioned twice. One value synonymous to worth. Yeah, I appreciate text edits like this. I really do. Certain racial, quote, certain racial groups over others, it is vague. We know that in this country, we are primarily speaking of values of whiteness over others. How can we show active participation in anti-racist approaches of the programs, entities, agencies, their policies, stance, practices? If we want to be preventative, we should have required training around this, and implicit bias and more should be part of the licensing requirements in a series of training. Should be more than person. And is over other racial groups needed? There's more to being anti-racist than valuing one group over another. So there's really, like, this feedback speaks to this definition. It's really needs some work and kind of reshaping. So I really appreciate all of this input, and we will work on updating it. Implicit bias. So again, this is the definition that we were working from. Implicit bias means the unconscious mental process resulting in feelings and attitudes about people based on race, age, and appearance. These feelings and beliefs are expressed automatically without conscious awareness and have an impact on other people and groups of people. And here was the feedback, suggestion to add perception and behavior after feelings and attitudes. Unconscious, quote, mental process may not be the perfect way to describe. What are other words that describe what is happening, taking out the word mental? Add disability and intersectionality would be important. Perhaps unconscious internal processes. Take out other and have an impact on people. And what's the specific context of implicit bias in this rule language, which I think that went back to our conversation about trying to understand, like, as we're defining this, what does that mean for us right now? Why is it in rule? And this is one of those places where we have to put it in rule before we then can figure out what those interventions and trainings and how are we going to be addressing it. And that part doesn't show up in rule, but we're going to get there. All right, so regional service providers. We are looking at how do we define regional service provider. We said it means an entity that provides infant and early childhood mental health consultation services to early care and education providers and coordinates infant and early childhood mental health consultation services with other early childhood technical assistance providers to promote early care and education provider access to resources, training, and other technical assistance opportunities. A lot of words in there. We had feedback was some discussion about how to define eligibility factors that are not in rule, but in requirements for contract, such as a proven history of responsiveness. Like, what I hear with that is we want to know that whoever it is that's getting these contracts, we want to know that they're going to be responsive and right there to jump in. And also having contracts describe required responsiveness timeline for regional service providers to call provider or parent back within 48 hours. Yeah. All right, so another long one here. Eligibility. So this is who is it that can apply to become a regional service provider? So number one, the Early Learning Division will administer a program that provides funding to eligible entities to serve as regional service providers. Number two, the following types of entities may apply to the Early Learning Division to be a regional service provider. Child care resource and referral agencies, early learning hubs, relief nurseries, community-based organizations, culturally specific organizations, federally recognized Oregon tribal nations, community mental health organizations, coordinated care organizations, and other healthcare organizations. And three, to be eligible to become a regional service provider, an entity must be able to A, demonstrate evidence of their commitment to equity and culturally responsive practice, B, ensure that infant and early childhood mental health consultation services are accessible to populations most disproportionately impacted by suspension and expulsion, and C, demonstrate the ability to collaborate with and coordinate services with other technical assistance providers to determine which person or program is best suited to respond to the request for services from an early care and education provider. And in this case, the feedback is relatively short compared to the length of the thing we were defining. So a few bullet points. Should there be ways to fund new organizations that are culturally specific to provide services in the future? So like making sure we're keeping an open door, making it accessible for new culturally specific programs. Add disability specific organizations as an option. and specifically add EI, ECSE providers to list of eligible entities to provide infant and early childhood mental health consultations. All right. So funding, we have a line in our rule set on funding. The early learning division shall determine for each fiscal year the portion of the funds available for regional service providers. And we have the feedback. It needs to be based on equity. Whatever the formula is, it needs to be an equitable distribution, equitable, not equal. It should not be for only nonprofit organizations, include opportunities for smaller programs, make it accessible to innovative partners. And suggestion, good call out to change from Early Learning Division, ELD, to DELC, Department of Early Learning and Care. Yes, thank you. Other feedback that we received, comments that were made, or comments that were they might not have been made out loud, but were shared. So, well, talking about a transitioning plan, helping the parent find a care setting that can serve the family and child's needs better shouldn't be looked at as suspension or expulsion. No matter the help, there are still some settings that are just not going to work for children. There should also be a definition that defines parent participation. If a parent is refusing help, then programs should either be able to bypass them and still receive help while the child is in care, or they have the right to terminate. That would not fall under the child's behavior, but under parents' refusal to work with the program. I also disagree with including trial periods as a form of suspension. Many private care settings use this not to engage how the child interacts with the group, but also how the provider and parents connect. Especially when care is in a home setting, we should not be taking away the rights of providers to feel safe from adults. We should include that suspension or exclusion also does not cover when a family is removed due to disrespect, aggression, threats of harm, persistent policy violations, or intentional defamation of the business from a parent. Yeah, thank you for that feedback. I hear a bunch of different things in there, but I want to just specifically mention, I hear the real concerns around safety from child, safety from parents or other adults, and recognize that is definitely, I mean, that's a very real thing that we need to know and be prepared to address and talk about. So then another point, we needed placed in rule some sort of amnesty to providers, so that if they are participating in support, they will be held harmless if there is an injury or et cetera, that there is not a licensing violation on their record. Yes, here. It speaks to, need for additional collaboration and coordination within our system. I think that was the last review slide, Carrie?
Yes, thank you, Katrina, for reviewing all of that feedback.
Yeah, and thank you to all of you for sharing your feedback. I made comments or responses to a few things, but the things that I didn't respond to verbally, like I am listening, I'm taking them in, and keeping a record of everything so that we can consider it, incorporate everything that we can.
And I think both for our upcoming conversation and for if you just heard some things and you want to reinforce something or you have something new to share, we just wanted to continue to share that you can give us feedback on the Post-it notes that we've been doing this whole time. You can use the chat And if you wanted to send some individual feedback on anything that we've discussed up to this date and what we will discuss later today, you can use Remy's feedback form, and she provides the link on the agenda as well as in the chat, or you can just email her directly and not deal with the form. And I think we're now going to turn this over to Karina, who's going to introduce us to our first advisory conversation for today.
So we have a first conversation that, if I'm reading this agenda right, we'll have 15 minutes for discussion, and we're going to be doing 2 definitions that will include, we can see them on the next slide here, and they're anti-bias education and anti-bias practices. So just for folks who might not be looking at the screen, and so we can make sure that folks can hear the definition, I'll go ahead and read these. Through the anti-bias education means an approach to teaching and learning designed to increase understanding of difference and their value to a respectful and civil society, and to actively challenge bias, stereotyping, and all forms of discrimination in schools and communities. It incorporates inclusive curriculum that reflects diverse experiences and perspectives, instructional methods that advance all students' learning, and strategies to create and sustain safe, inclusive, and respectful learning communities. So this is the language that we will be reviewing over today. And then for the second definition, draft definition that we have is anti-bias practices. Means an approach to providing services as early care and education, technical assistance, mental health consultation that works to actively prevent and oppose the unfair treatment of people based on race, ethnicity, language, sex, gender, socioeconomic status, disability, immigration status. So we'll go ahead and break up into 4 groups with these definitions. We'll have 15 minutes to discuss, and we'll have ELD staff again joining these to more so help with the note taking. But again, these are your conversations, so please, the floor is yours, and make sure to jot any questions that you might have for us if there's things that we need to cover. And select somebody to report out when we come back. That would be really helpful for us. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing here. And we don't have our questions, just what stands out, what resonates with you, any suggestions to language, anything like that we can take note of. So I think Remy's going to be breaking us out here once we are ready. And we have 15 minutes once we get sent off.
Yeah, and I'll open up the groups right now, so see y'all in 15 minutes.
I see a question. So there are these definitions for technical assistance to providers, or how providers will give care and education.
Sorry, I'm here. Sorry.
Sorry, I know that's some folks left, so I'm not sure. How do we want to address this? Carrie or Katrina, do you?
I think the definition probably should resonate for all audiences, right? So I think you can give us feedback if there's nuances or differences between, if it was for technical assistance or for early care and ed providers, would you make changes? But I think we want a definition that would be
broader, what it means. Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Cool. And we will be back at about let's see, 1:43, 1:45.
Remy, have you made me co-host? So if anyone gets kicked out, I can re-put them back in a room.
Yes, good idea.
Great. Hi, Allison. We're just in our first 15-minute small group discussion.
Thanks, Carrie.
I think we'll see the other groups return in the next 20 or 30 seconds. Karina, I think we have everyone back from all the rooms now.
Perfect. So with that, we'll go ahead and kind of transition over to some share outs. And is there anyone that wants to volunteer to go first? Well, any group that would love to share.
I'll go first.
Thank you,
because
Ashley.
I have to drop that too. Yeah. Yes.
And we are
I
in
was
group
in group
1 for idea boards.
Thank you. So one of the first things that we noticed is the use of the words respectful and civil. And just because those words can be subjective, we were thinking to just kind of take those out at the beginning. So that it's very clear what it is that we're asking or what we're defining. We also brought up the word of inclusive being used several times in the bottom half of the definition, and kind of finding a way to take that out and just kind of listing out what was there for the anti-bias education definition, and then making sure that we're actively engaging the anti-bias component. So we had a lot of good feedback around that. And then for the anti-bias practices, the groups that were listed there, we were trying to make sure that that listed out everything, and then maybe changing the language to something along the lines of protected groups, or keeping what we have there and adding the words protective groups to ensure that we're covering everyone and not missing any groups, or giving the, as time progresses, if there's an additional group, that's added, just making sure that we wouldn't have to come back and make changes to the terminology. We also talked a lot about removing some of the fluff, some of the words, and there just kind of seems like they weren't really covering anything specifically. An example of that is the term works to. We were thinking just removing that entirely so that it just reads that prevents. Yeah, that is our feedback.
Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you, Ashley.
Great. I see thumbs up and whatnot. So that was group 1, and we have 3 groups. Is that correct?
Yeah.
All right. So anyone from group 2 or 3 who would like to jump in?
I can go. I'm not sure which group we were. I don't know if.
I know it by facilitator, so.
Oh, John was our
Okay,
facilitator.
John's group? Okay, great.
Yeah. So we had similar discussion about the wordiness of the definition, especially anti-bias education. And I'm sorry, I'm pulling up our idea. There we go. So we questioned whether it was necessary to list out school and community as the only time where using anti-bias approaches are necessary. So we thought perhaps just taking out school and community and putting a period after discrimination. So we're just preventing discrimination. That would be helpful. And then again, later on, it seemed like this maybe was a definition pulled from ODE or from a school-based definition. So we talked about changing the word students to the words children, learning just so it's broader. And then it was confusing to some of us grammatically where it said understanding of difference rather than differences. So kind of looking at if that's the proper use or if it makes more sense to rearrange that as a plural. And then anti-bias practices, we discussed that we appreciated that there was mention of actively using, so there's active strategies to prevent or to employ anti-bias practices instead of just like, we don't do it, so we're not gonna do it. So there's some intentionality around actively preventing those things. And then when Remy mentioned like how would we put it into practice, or would it make sense for us to put into practice as providers? We discussed it, is it necessarily addressing all the things that we would love to see happening when we're talking about anti-bias that provides holistic services? So thinking about the whole family, the provider, the child, things like trauma-informed care, having a broader understanding of anti-bias in all the things besides just curriculum. Did I miss anything? Anybody else?
Thank you, Lauren. Perfect. And got a thumbs up from John. All right, so our third group would be Allison / Remy's group, group 2.
I think it
I
was,
think they just went. Yeah, I think it was Martina and myself and
Sorry, yeah, sorry, Karina. I switched to the facilitators because Al was a little bit late. So yes, it is Katrina's group.
Katrina.
Well,
Yeah.
now we know. Thank you.
I do have to log off at 2 today. So Martina, if you're okay, I'll share it because I know you'll probably have to share it later. Okay. In the anti-bias education, a lot of the things that we were talking about are similar to what our other groups were talking about. There were differences, right? Is it differences or difference? We also had a large discussion about, well, what does this look like later on in practice? And so it doesn't necessarily inform what the definition is. But a really important piece of it was, not to use the word approach. We're not approaching this anti-bias education. This is intentional programming. This is intentional. Whether it's you're the technical assistance provider or you are the educator yourself. And so we thought, that should be addressed or changed. Also, how is family involved in this? Possibly saying, after diverse, it's families, experiences, and all of the things that go along with that. With anti-bias practices, kind of similar to our other groups, adding intersectionality to the end of that when we are, specifically calling out, groups that typically have biases or folks have, whether implicit or unintentional bias, adding intersectionality to that, because that can be, and then it was just never enough time. It wasn't enough time to kind of dive in deeper, as usual.
Thank you so much, Molly. And I just want to acknowledge that time just seems to constantly slip away. So hopefully we can reconvene for a 6th meeting after this. I'm just going to make a plug. If you haven't filled out the doodle poll, please do that. And Leslie, I see your hand is up.
I had to take a minute to look up the difference between using differences and difference. And I think I like the term differences because if you just say difference, it almost feels like what we said before, like there's a standard that we're putting everything up against versus differences that let you align things in multiple ways. Because at first I thought, no, difference is it. It's just, but I think saying it as differences seems more impactful than just difference, because it makes it feel like there is something we're all up against this one thing. It's a concept or a rightness or something like that. So I think if you guys whittle it down, I vote for differences.
Thanks for that, Leslie.
Mhm.
The nuances and words for sure make a big difference. Great. Well, it looks like we are moving right along, and we have another breakout session that we'll have a little bit more time with, but of course there's more language. So we'll have 30 minutes on this one, and I'm going to hand it over to Carrie to help us review.
Great. All right, so our second advisory has to do with the part of the legislation, and I thought I would just show you guys. We know we gave you the piece of legislation in preparation for the first meeting, but I think as you review the rules and help us think about what really should be in rules, we just wanted to show you that the legislation says that the Early Learning Division shall establish requirements that early childhood care and education programs certified or registered under ORS 329A.280 or 329A.330 or receiving public funding for early childhood care and education services must request services from the Early Childhood Suspension and Expulsion Prevention Program when a child in an early childhood care or education program is facing potential expulsion. I know that some of our conversations previously is you guys have raised issues like facing what's really preventative, what's really helpful to providers and to families. So we continue to appreciate your reflections as you kind of see the three items in the rules that kind of are related to that statement in the legislation. One is to define what that means, especially since it says all providers that receive public funding. So here is how the draft rules define early care and education provider that it relates to this requirement. So it's all registered and certified family and center-based childcare types described in ORS 329A.600, preschool promise providers, organ prenatal to kindergarten providers, baby promise programs, and relief nurseries. And then here are the requirements that we would like you to review for the rule set. So the first one is that providers are required to request services from the Early Childhood Suspension and Expulsion Program when a provider identifies that a young child's behavior or other needs have the potential to result in a future suspension or expulsion, before a provider may suspend a young child and before a provider may expel a young child. The second requirement is after initiating a request for services and before suspending or expelling a child, early care and education providers are required to engage in the infant and early childhood mental health consultation or other technical assistance services that are offered, and B, demonstrate a good faith effort to implement the services and strategies identified through collaboration with the infant and early childhood mental health consultants and technical assistance providers. And then 3, a provider may not engage in exclusionary practices, which I think this goes back to the kind of conversations we were having, that definition probably is very important. One of the reasons we addressed it in the first meeting. And then the third thing is reporting. So there's actually a reporting related to the regional service providers that we discussed at the last meeting. So upon request by the division, early care and education providers receiving technical assistance from regional service providers must make available to the division information and data that the division determines is necessary to monitor and evaluate the program. So this is to hold the expulsion and suspension prevention program to monitor and evaluate whether it is helping providers, families and children. And then the second one is regional service providers must cooperate and participate in the division's program monitoring, program evaluations, and reporting requirements. So providers would be probably involved in providing data, but it's really about in service to the expulsion and suspension prevention program. So since we're a couple of minutes early, let me just make sure to see if there's any questions related to those 3 rule items. We're going to return to your small groups. Since we've lost a couple of people, I think Remy will have an announcement to us that we'll be in 2 small groups. You have 30 minutes for the 3 items. You'll have the ideas board, and then we'll do our report out from each group where you can share what you like, anything missing, questions, and obviously recommendations.
I'll just say really quick, I do have to head out early, but I really, I love this part of it and I want to be a part of it. I think that within the definitions, and without going too much into it, I would just say between the 2 groups, thinking of, the responsibility of providing families with the understanding of knowing what the responsibility of the provider is when we are in this situation, I think is really important to think about when we are thinking about this definition, right? Not only what is required of, the provider to, be involved with this new technical assistance and what that looks like, but then also what is the responsibility of ensuring that the family is aware of what these rules are, that the family is aware that they can ask their provider to get involved in this, to, do all of these things. I know that there are rules that they have to do it. That's in the definitions. But sometimes that doesn't happen, right? Or there are a myriad of reasons why it doesn't happen. But what also is the responsibility to ensure that the family knows that there are processes and there are rules, and this is new, and how to keep them. I know that that's a concern that I've heard in many of our other reasons of how to keep the provider safe and ensure that they're protected as well. But ensuring that families fully understand, right, that they can be a part of this and that they can be a part of that process, and how we can incorporate them in the definition within these rules to know that they can really, become a team and can be cohesive in following through with these things. Anyway, I just in reading that, these different definitions and knowing I won't be a part of the conversation, just, keeping that in mind, that family perspective, and making sure that they can really work together to make this best situation for our little people.
So I really appreciate that. I think, our whole conversation from the beginning is this push-pull between the rules defining the what, and then there's a lot of the how around where should the rules hint at or dictate something about the how, and then where does the how really fall into other strategies that the Early Learning Division would have in partnership with communities around the state. So why don't we send you into groups and really give us feedback on the what, if you have these considerations that were just offered on the how strategies and they're occurring to you, please offer that. But I think we do want to make sure that what is required of providers makes sense and is resonating of you. And as you think about what does that mean for the implications of their partnership with families and parents, and kind of how this would kind of roll out over time, if that makes sense to people. Okay. So Remy, I'll turn it over to you to send us into 30-minute groups.
Yeah, and just really quick, as Carrie kind of Easter egged a couple of minutes ago, we are combining groups 2 and 3 into one. So there will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of you in room 2 now. Unless I know that some people are leaving early. But anyway, opening up some breakout rooms now, and we'll see y'all in 30 minutes.
Carrie,
Yes.
our ideas board did something very strange and all of our wonderful comments seem to have disappeared. Anybody have any idea on how to retrieve them?
So I've used ideas board since the pandemic started, and I've never had this happen to me. It logged me out too, and now it's acting super slow. I tried to Google whether ideas board went down. I'm assuming that it captured any comments that were inputted, that we will be able to retrieve them, that I don't think it's my individual boards, because it won't even let me log in right now.
Okay, that
So I'm sad because I saw lots of good comments going up and was getting ready to share my screen. So I'm sad that it's not just me.
No, and mine, I typed one comment out like 3 times and it kept disappearing. I thought it was my mistake. Carrie, I wasn't sure if you're facilitating this piece or if I was going to do the report out.
Yeah, I mean, I think since I can't share the screen, but there are 2 groups, so maybe we could have a conversation. Oh, I just got we're sorry, something went wrong. It finally loaded to tell me something was wrong. So
I can screen share for our group. I have some of those up if that works.
okay, great. That where you captured how much you were able to.
Yeah, I was able to capture.
Yeah, just don't leave the page.
Okay, I just screenshot it. All right. And whoever wants to jump in from our group, please do.
I'll jump in. Gosh, this is so small. Let me make it bigger. One of the things that came up was provider definitions. I was wondering about the inclusion of drop-in childcare to this conversation, and not the ones that you can use up to 25 hours, but like if someone is just doing this on rare occasion, like where is the space in which they're going to receive support for a child that comes very occasionally? I don't know if this rule set should touch them or not. It's more of a question than I have an answer for, but I think there needs to be discussion around occasional licensed childcare, someone that comes in every once in a while. Does this really work? Are these supports work for them there? And then we also wanted to call out publicly funded programs need to be explicit in saying those that receive ERDC funds, not just the promises, but if you are even a family, friend, and neighbor that receive ERDC funds, public funds, you should be included in this rule set. So that was an opinion that was brought up there. I can't read that, so small. Okay, thank you. Okay. Need to discuss. We said so much. Our questions were so we talked about good faith and measurable. So there should be some clear timelines in the how part of it. Like if I reach out, to get assistance, what is the reasonable timeline for me to receive that? And do I have to hold on and suffer with a situation that I really can't deal with while someone from the state comes out and tries to help me? Like where's accountability for that support for the provider? And then there was also discussion about requirements on what is the clear line between a parent maybe that doesn't want to participate in supports. Do I then still have to, again, to the other point, suffer within that if a parent does not want their child to participate in the intervention or whatever the support is? Like, is there the good faith effort, and then I still get to probably think about whether the child is a good fit for me and go ahead with expulsion. So we need to talk more about what that looks like. And I know we're building to the expulsion ban. And so this is in the meantime, the things that we have to figure out. Let's see. And we talked about tiered supports too, like in that wait time, is there something that's an emergency and I need to get, service or help within a more quick turnaround versus, something I could wait on and have more conversations with. And so making sure we're defining that. And then when it talked about reporting information to the ELD, we wanted clear definitions on what that requested information would be. Is it just specific to that child? Because it seemed very broad, in that you could be asked to turn in anything. So I guess at some point we'll get to what those requests could be, because I've seen some interesting requests and some other kinds of dealings with the state that you're like, we're like, what am I, what is the thing you're asking? How does that relate to this? So making sure it's very clear what those documents are. Somebody else jump in if I missed something.
Great recap.
Mhm.
Thank you, Leslie.
So for our group, I think everybody lost their ideas board except for me. And I'm just, we did lose the last one on reporting,
Okay.
but I do have the, the two other columns. So we also talked, just like last group, about receiving ERDC and if that falls under public funding, if they're not registered or certified or center-based. And then we also talked a little bit about the preschool for all, because we know that that passed in Multnomah County and hopefully it'll pass in other counties, but that's also public funding, but I guess it doesn't come from the state, it comes from local, but does that also, are those programs also included? And revised to say all programs that are required to be registered, certified, etc. So that was on our first slide. And then on the second one with the requirements, for A, on number 1A, when a provider identifies a child's behavior and other needs, so we also want to put families in there. Oh, there they are. So if a family identifies needs or behaviors, that we can include the family in there. And then perimeter around the good faith effort. I think the last group talked about that. We all feel that is kind of vague. And then we talked about who will say that the provider did enough to fulfill good faith, and maybe change good faith to quantify more. And then good faith is a positive intent from everyone, and we are doing our best work to work together and on behalf of the child. And how we get there looks different in each community. So there's big differences there. More clarity to ensure that if the provider calls for support and is waiting for a triage, what is the requirements while waiting? And we also talked about different areas in the state, like more rural areas, how fast do they get support? How long do they have to wait for it? So we talked a bit about that and what that actually looks like, and how much support also. And then reporting, our notes showed up. So upon request by the division DELC, like to change things to DELC throughout the whole document. Any early care and education providers, there's a typo, may want to have DELC represented. So that's providers receiving supports from regional service providers to TA or MH consultation, so it isn't confused with other TA providers. So that is what I have, and if anybody in the group has more, go ahead.
I just wanted to show group one what I have. So if that's also so it's come back up. So if there's anything missing from here, it looks like maybe your last sticky that starts with meat, Karina, in the purple.
You can see that there's one that's there like 3 times because I thought it was my mistake.
When it started to go down, so we can clean that up. We have a couple of minutes before we have to transition to next steps, I think, Karina, so we can just take a moment if there's anything else now that the two groups have reported that people want to flag or mention.
I'll go ahead and jump in. I have my hand up, but since Preschool for All was mentioned and I'm here, I just wanted to clarify a bit on our structure, is that our programs are licensed. And so all of those rules that we're designing would cover them, but we also already have our own preschool band. And so we're already building supports for our participants to retain placements. And we're designing that as we speak as well, but we already have that as a part of our program and the expectation for programs.
Leslie, that's a good point. I think we also learned in trying to think about what needed to be in rules that really OPK as part of Head Start is under federal rules around not allowing expulsion and suspension, and then Preschool Promise, I believe, I can't remember, not being an early learning division person, where it is in either the contract or the rules for the program. But that also doesn't, that's very typical around the country that publicly funded preschool programs are under that. So this is really about the transition and supports to childcare as we think about when you kind of look at the requirements and that kind of thing of who this will be brand new to in the state. All right. So we really appreciate your comments and that kind of thing. If you continue to have ideas for individual feedback, Remy has her smart sheet where you can submit feedback or you can email her directly. And then we wanted to take you up on a proposal for meeting 6. We thought that at a 6th meeting, we would review and reflect on the feedback received across the 4 meetings where we really discussed the content of the rules, discuss next steps and additional opportunities for input, and close out the RAC process. And we can have Remy comment on that. And that we wanted to say, okay, what are our next steps? So there's the actual revising the rules and definitions based on the feedback that you've given us to date, scheduling a 6th meeting. And so Remy can repeat the doodle poll. We wanted to share with you that a working draft of the rules will also be shared with the Early Learning Council at their June 29th meeting so that they have an opportunity to provide feedback before they're voting on the rules in September. There'll be a public comment period and Remy can give us details, but the initial public comment that's connected to this RAC will close on June 28th and then reopen on September 1st with the updated draft rule language before it goes to the Early Learning Council on September 28th. And our next meeting, our date will be determined by the doodle poll. We'll try to get it so that the most members of the RAC can attend the 6th meeting.
I can see people are filling it out, so thank you. There's more answers than there were earlier, so great.
Great.
I just wanted to share, I shared this in the breakout group that I was a part of, but I just want to express my appreciation to this whole group and for engaging in this process. It's a complicated, process in terms of like, there's not enough time. There's a lot of things to think through. How do we bring it all together? But I just really appreciate the time that you've taken and the ideas and comments and questions that you've shared. I guess it's hard for me to come up with the right words to say, I really appreciate it because your input will make this, it's not just the technical, like we have to do this. It really will make this whole rule set and this whole program much richer in its content and much, hopefully much more holistic in terms of how we build it and how we roll it out. So thank you. And if you know of people who are not on a part of this RAC, but are interested in providing input, you're welcome to share the current rule set with them, share that link to the smart sheets that Carrie just showed on that slide. and have people share their comments. And separate from the RAC process, once, like, it's sort of like, you know, we can only juggle so many balls at one time. But coming up very soon, there will be a bunch of opportunities for additional meetings that are less focused on kind of the they won't be focused on the specific rules. It'll be focused more on the, like, what do we need to build this program and be successful? What are the supports that everybody needs? What are the supports that providers need? What are the supports that our coaches and other technical assistance providers need? What's the training that our mental health consultation workforce, the existing workforce, what do they need? What do we need for our future workforce, mental health consultation workforce? And what do we need? How do we all coordinate? Like, how do we do that? Like, let's think together about what that looks like. So there'll be all of those things and more, to opportunities to have conversation on those things.
Thank you, Katrina. It looks like we are wrapped up for the day. Just really, I want to echo, of course, just appreciation for everyone. Miss Lydia, welcome back. It's great to see you back. And we'll, again, if there are any questions, comments that you want to make after this meeting, please feel free to reach out to any one of us, and we're happy to listen and converse further if needed. And with that, we'll go ahead and see you soon. We'll leave it at soon. But we're really looking forward to another conversation. I'm glad that this isn't the last one, I will say. So thanks again for offering your time and your willingness to share your wisdom and ideas and suggestions with us. So thank you, everyone.
Have a good afternoon.